Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Monday, May 4th, 2026, which of course means May the 4th be with you. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary, and if anybody is the Obi-Wan Kenobi of this show, it's me. So if you strike me down, Abe will become even more powerful than you could possibly imagine. That, of course, being Abe Greenwald, our executive editor. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Grogu, Seth Mendel, our senior editor. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And I'm stopping here. So,
Or Eliana and I will battle it out over who gets to be Leia, who gets to be Rey.
You know, the sort of the also ran women of the Star Wars universe.
Hey, Leia was on my Star Wars bed sheets as a child. She was right there next to Han. And yeah.
Okay, well, it's good because you had two challahs right on either side of your head then. Social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And Washington Free Beacon editor Eliana Johnson. Hi, Eliana.
Hi, John.
And yes, I will be taking my kids who insisted on it to a May 4th screening of Star Wars. And I do want to report that in 1977, the day that Star Wars opened at the Los Astor Plaza in Times Square, I did bike down from my high school to go to attend a 4:30 showing of Star Wars. And I remember vividly the moment when they jump into hyperspace and the entire audience, which is like 1,500 people, started screaming. I'd never seen such a thing in a movie theater. And I sort of knew even then at the age of 16 that something about life and culture in the world had forever changed, kind of like what may have happened last night with the announcement that that Donald Trump was ordering the opening of the Straits of Hormuz through American military action. Now, we've been having a conversation about what that actually means, because it seems to be more like a vibe opening of the Straits of Hormuz than it is America is literally escorting, American military craft are literally escorting ships out or through the Strait of Hormuz one by one by one by one. That doesn't seem to be quite what's happening. So we don't quite know what it means that we have announced that we are opening and keeping open the Straits of Hormuz. But of course, it does represent a new, it does start the clock anew in terms of this war with Iran, which is now a naval war.
We're like the guy who comes over when you're trying to get out of your parking space and goes, nope, quick, cut it to the left a little bit. Now, stop there. You got room.
Sometimes that guy is great. And then sometimes, of course, he traps you further in to the space you're trying to get out of. Like, yeah, it's like, in this case, though, that often has a who asked you element, right? It's sort of like, was I looking for advice on how to get out of the space I'm in? And then sometimes it's like, oh my God, thank you so much. And obviously the ships that are trapped inside the Strait of Hormuz are desperately eager for some help to get out. We were just joking. I want Seth to maybe repeat his one-liner before we started, that this is now a war being fought for, as Bulworth would have it, for insurance companies, because the entire world economy is now being held hostage by whether or not an insurance company will insure your ship if it's going through around, near, approximate to, way away from, or whatever, the Strait of Hormuz. So, Seth, what do you make of a war to protect the integrity of the financial position of insurance companies?
I bet I'm going to check my coverage and make sure that I'm in network. That's the first thing I'm going to do. Right. But
So is this Obamacare?
It's like
Obamacare for shipping? Like, is that what we're promising here? Is 100% coverage for all the world's boats?
Yeah, so there would be a public option if that French and British and German plan would come off the barricades.
Fair enough.
I think there are a couple things that are noteworthy about what the administration has said it wants to do. The first is that the goal of the effort is to get out of the strait vessels that are trapped. It is not to restore full freedom of navigation through the strait. So that's a limited operation to remove these trapped vessels. And the second is that this is not a full, naval escort through the strait. It appears to be a provision of some kind of air cover to guide the vessels through the strait, and the vessels and their insurance companies are saying it's not sufficient for them to feel comfortable moving out of the strait. So I'm not sure what it's actually going to accomplish. That being said, it does appear to me on the part of the administration to be directionally correct. A move towards the use of the American military to reopen the strait, but directionally correct, but insufficient, I would say.
Well, and it's probably best to see it in the context of a couple of other things that happened over the weekend, including the Trump administration saying very clearly that the most recent offer that Iran made for some sort of deal or some sort of peace agreement was just nowhere near where it should be. So if we think about this, as Eliana said, as a sort of, well, let's see what we can do without full-on naval escort or full-on resuming military conflict, it's a possibility that after trying this for a few days and it not being successful and the administration not having success getting any allies to join us in this effort, that would at least be a reasonable claim to make in terms of resuming any sort of more intense activity, military activity.
What I'm puzzled by is Trump said that we're still studying. It looks bad, but we're studying it. So that just means he doesn't want to reject the document because it's the only piece of paper. We don't have a piece. So that's a piece of, if he says no, then there's nothing on the table to talk about. And he doesn't.
We should add that they're also running out the clock, as Scott Bessent noted, trying to, at a certain point, they'll have to shut down oil production because they'll have no place to store their oil. Right. And so there's a sense in which they have a clock that they're running and trying to keep that time going while claiming to look at the proposal they sent.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, the truth is that absent the effect that public opinion has on this stuff, the perception of gas prices, whether more Republicans fold with the upcoming midterms coming up on trying to rein in the president's power to run this war, etc. Outside of those things, time is very clearly on our side more than it is on Iran's side. They are nearing $5 billion in lost revenue in 3 weeks. I mean, they're getting their clock clean. This is not, they can't afford that. They're losing. I mean, the lower estimates are like $200 million a day. The true number could be double that. It's hard always to know because we have to, prices go up as the conflict goes on, and that sort of resets our estimates and stuff like that. But I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars a day. And the U.S., as we talked about last week, has pursued some of these shadow fleet vessels, that are outside of the embargo area. I mean, there is a point at which there's just no money in the bank for them. I mean, they've got, maybe a rainy day fund, but you can't run a country on a rainy day fund. This is like when I was a local reporter and they used to say, they used to force these tiny municipalities to keep 3% of their budget in the bank in case of a rainy day, like in a school district. And then they'd have to use that 3% because, one new kid transferred into the school district or something, and some podunk town had to empty its bank. That's what the RGC is up to. They're up to, it's time to spend that 3% sort of thing. And so, in general, on time is on our side. But I would say that Trump still has to make this case to the American people. I don't know why he's not, in large part because history shows that when presidents say, here's why we're doing this, here's what we're trying to accomplish with this war, approval numbers go up. I mean, okay, it's almost...
I can explain it. I really can't explain it. He does not believe in the power of persuasion. He believes that the results will either speak for themselves or that nobody who dislikes him will ever give him credit, and that if you're on the negative side of the ledger, you are not movable. And therefore, he is operating from that basis, that the people that he might need to speak to are beyond his reach, and he is banking on the people that he already has to form his platform and to create the floor below which he cannot go. And so he's not going to waste his time doing the explaining, because first of all, every time he explains, he says we've already won the war. He says the Strait of Hormuz is open. He says whatever it is he says that is either not true, is true theoretically but not practically. As I say, it's not like there is a giant gate across the 21 miles of the Strait of Hormuz that is down. That means your ship cannot go through it. It is therefore open in that sense. There's no blockade like with 21 miles of boats standing in your way, but it's not really open, and we didn't win it the first day. But what you're right about, and where things get complicated, is we're in the catbird seat. They're suffering. Their oil is they're about to start having a real crisis with their oil, because it's no joke to have to cap an oil well or to stop production on a functioning oil facility. It can take weeks to stop it and months to turn it back on. Obviously, I mean, I'm not an oil geologist, but what little I know from such, sources as Daniel Yergin and the show Landman inform me that this is no easy task. So we're in the catbird seat as long as we're willing to endure. And that's where we get into the question of whether or not the Trump administration and the United States is negotiating and arguing with itself over whether this war is of value. And Trump clearly is resisting the idea that people in his administration, siren song, are singing that he can kind of somehow declare victory and get out. He doesn't seem to think that he can. He needs to be able to say at the end of this process that we have done what is necessary to make sure that Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. If that means we have to get our hands on the fissile material, that's what that means. If it means that we can declare with credibility that we have destroyed every possible way for Iran to restart its nuclear program, and that whatever is there is buried forever, and that they'll never be able to build another centrifuge or whatever, maybe that'll be it. But until he gets there, he is not done.
But he can't. I think Seth's point, if we think about it broadly, is disturbing in this sense. He can never get there because he hasn't been direct and truthful with the American people from the beginning. Whether you want to say that's because, as you say, John, he doesn't think he can persuade, and there's some truth to that in terms of the people who will always be against what he's doing, or that he actually believes what he says in the moment he says it, but then changes his mind later. Fair enough, but there is no consistent message for the people, and the problem is he does also run up against, first of all, the fact that he hasn't been talking that much about the nuclear material in the last few weeks, the last 2 weeks in particular. But that concerns me. The other thing is that gas has gone up 30 cents a gallon in 1 week, and over $1, almost $1.50 in the last couple months. So that's average gas prices. Some people are feeling a lot more if they live in higher tax states. That's a fact that people know every week when they fill up their tank that he can't really talk himself out of. And I think that's where 6 months out from the midterm election, I will be curious to see if he does what you say, John, and just at some point says, well, we've declared victory on our terms. Here are our terms. This is where it goes. I mean, he's a lame duck president. He can do that. And then the fallout comes for, Republicans in the midterms and then later in 2028.
Look, the fallout is coming anyway. Right. So now the question is, this picture has been muddied a little bit for Republicans in a way that might complicate Trump's life, because there was a kind of sense of desperate loss that Republicans were already starting pre-morning. The Republicans were already starting to hit on the House and then maybe the Senate. And then two things happened last week that, in my favorite line in a movie that no one's ever heard of, the movie Clockwise, where John Cleese is a very precise English guy who has to get from one place to another by 5 p.m. And the whole movie is him getting stopped along the way and prevented from going somewhere. written by the brilliant playwright Michael Frayn. And it's 4 o'clock and he's 30 miles from where he needs to be. And he's sitting on the side of the road and he says, "It's not the despair, it's the hope I can't stand." So Republicans suddenly get these two little lifelines. One is the Supreme Court racial gerrymander decision, which means that Louisiana and Tennessee, and I think it's Louisiana and Tennessee, but maybe other states are revisiting
several
their
other
maps.
southern states.
Right, are revisiting their maps to see if they can redraw them in a way that will be obviously more helpful to Republicans or something or other. That's number one. So that gives the idea, oh, I don't know, maybe the midterms won't be as bad as we think. And in fact, if you look at the Real Clear Politics average, the Democratic advantage across in the RCP average of averages is 5.7%. At this point in previous elections where there were waves, that number for the party that won the wave at this moment in May was generally in double digits, or at the lowest, like 9%, moving on to like 15 or 16%, that people say, I would rather vote for the Republican than the Democrat in, say, 2010, or I'd rather vote for the Democrat than the Republican in 2018. That number is not as high as I would expect it to be. In other words, 5.7% is a low. That means Democrats aren't going to win that many seats. Of course, they don't need to win that many seats. If they win 6 seats, they probably take the majority. But there is that weird lifeline of hope. And then the second lifeline of hope is the departure of Janet Mills from the senatorial race in Maine and the elevation of Graham Plattner to the senatorial candidate in Maine. And this is, I think, clearly a potentially nationwide disaster for Democrats on the order, with a couple of other things happening, maybe like Abdul El-Sayed winning the primary in Michigan, where you can make a national case against the Democratic Party senatorial candidates, just as Democrats made a national case against the Republican senatorial candidates in 2010, usually thought of as something you can't do, that these are statewide elections, so it goes state by state. But if you can say they're electing a Nazi left-winger in Maine and they're electing an Islamist left-winger, they're not putting up an Islamist left-winger in Michigan, you cannot trust Democrats generically. They've gone insane. And that, I think, provides a measure of hope to Republicans. Not that Republicans really thought they were going to hold on to the Senate, but then the last 8 weeks got people a little nervous. And so now they do have a pressure point against Trump to say, look, we may have a chance of prevailing here. Your war is going to ruin this for us. And so he's going to have to stand firm against them if he thinks time is on our side, but it's going to take time.
I'm not sure who would say that to him, though.
Huh?
I'm not sure who would say that to him.
Thune and Johnson.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't think he would consider that sufficient pressure on him.
Well, a few days ago, Susan Collins did vote against the GOP's position on the war powers. I think that's out of, Graham Plattner in one fell swoop knocked Mills out of the race, but also, very clearly spooked Susan Collins into this vote. So I suppose that there's the possibility of Democrats rallying a vote that could actually have some effect. I'm not really sure. But that's the Susan Collins vote switch.
I don't think it's a vote thing. I think the whole question is, who does he hear from? And if he hears from people who are saying, look, what if we could turn the tide here and not have a Democratic triumph in 2026? That's going to look so good for you, Mr. President, sir. You are the greatest man ever.
The Republican message can't simply be that guy's a Nazi. That's not going to be enough to win for Republicans. They have to have a better economic message. It was enough for Democrats to win in 2010. It was way more than enough. It's a different. There's
witch.
Also this issue. There's also this issue of the youthfulness of some of these candidates. It's not. Look, a lot of them are DSA nutbags on the economy. I completely agree with that. But the Republican response has to engage the fact that a lot of voters are energized by seeing younger, newer faces. That was the Mamdani effect effect. And so they'll overlook a lot of crazy if they think there's some sort of economic benefit to them as a voter, and they see it as tossing out the old guys. I'm not saying they're correct in that assessment at all, but I have yet not heard from the Republican Party generally a response that directly engages that curiosity from voters.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying we do have a recent moment in a midterm election where the party that was in power but facing enormous headwinds and was slammed and destroyed in the House preserved its majority in the Senate by saying, this one's crazy, this one's crazy, this one's crazy. That was Murdoch, Angle, O'Donnell.
And O'Donnell.
John,
I agree with you in part and disagree with you in part. I actually am going to differentiate here between Plattner and El Sayed. I think the question facing Republicans and Democrats in the midterms actually is Democrats are obviously the party is in the process of being captured by radicals, and we'll get to, maybe we should talk about the Democratic National Security Organization that plans to play in the midterms, that's being led by Ben Rhodes and Jake Sullivan. These are very establishment players, and they have put as its new leader a former what's the Palestinian group on campus?
SJP.
Yes,
for Justice in Palestine.
The former head of Students for Justice in Palestine, who's been pictured, dancing in front of anti-Israel banners. Maher Bitar, it will lead that group. So I think the question is, for the midterms, is are voters dissatisfied enough with the Trump administration that they are willing to embrace the Democratic equivalent of Todd Aiken, legitimate rape, Christine O'Donnell, I am not a witch, and blanking on the third one now.
Sharon Angle.
Yeah, the Sharon Angle out in Nevada, who was running against Harry Reid. 15 years ago, or 16 years ago, voters were not. This year, will independent voters, who are really the ones up for grab, be willing to pull the lever for Abdul El Sayed in Michigan and Graham Plattner in Maine, and unwilling to vote for, Mike Rogers, who's basically a normal Republican, or Susan Collins, who's basically a normal Republican, because these guys are too crazy? I don't know the answer to that, but that is the question in this election. And I don't think Plattner and Abdul El Sayed in Michigan, he's not the nominee yet. We'll see what happens. That's a late primary. Are the same. I think that these Islamist left-wing candidates strike voters a little bit differently than the Plattners do. The Nazi tattoo did not appear to scare voters away. I think voters are more turned off.
Primary voters.
Democratic primary voters.
The largest number of independent voters in Maine is not a Democratic state. Maine is an independent state.
We'll see, but I think it is the Muslim and the Islamist stuff I don't think will fly. It is an open question to me, and I also think Plattner, I'm afraid of him. I think Mills was the weaker candidate in that race. She never could get off the ground. I think Schumer miscalculated, and I think Plattner actually is quite talented. I am afraid of him. I don't know how voters will calculate. Look, I wouldn't underestimate Collins. She's an incredible political athlete, but I would not write Plattner off, I think, in the same way that you are, John.
Can I just answer this before you speak? I am not writing Plattner off. I am actually saying that Plattner is a gift to the National Republican Party. What happens in Maine itself may be a different issue, because Maine is weird, and maybe he'll, tweak to Maine issues and stuff like that, and he's young. And it's the people who aren't even in a position to vote for him for whom he can become a crystallizing figure. That's what happens in these Senate races that get nationalized, is this question of whether or not across the party they start seeming like they're Fruit Loops to people elsewhere, and thus become cash cow fundraising machines in places where no one's even going to vote for them. And I'm just saying, getting back. Okay, Abe, I'm sorry. Please.
Well,
Okay.
what scares
Yeah,
me is that Plattner, I don't think, reads like a Fruit Loop when he talks, and I think his biggest weakness is going to be as follows. And this is Maine specific. Maine is the oldest state in the union, and Maine is a very poor state. And while Plattner is trying to portray himself as a working class Mainer, he is in fact a child of tremendous privilege who attended a very expensive boarding school, whose daddy loaned him the money to buy his house. And I think puncturing that image that he is trying to portray will be essential to that race. He's a phony. He's a hypocritical phony. And I think getting at that will be quite important. But I don't think he comes off like an extremist in the way Abdul El-Sayed, that guy sounds insane. He looks insane and he sounds insane.
Right.
All right.
It's
So
early,
I think,
but go ahead.
I think part of the answer, big part of the answer to the question Eliana poses about independent voters, how they're going to respond here, has to do with the fact that when there are Republican radicals or Republican crazies, the news, the stories that independents hear about them is, oh my God, did you hear about this crazy guy talking about legitimate rape? Did you hear about this woman denying her ties to witchdom, Wicca? When the Democrats run a radical or a crazy person, the entire framework is different, and this is the news that gets to independents because they're not necessarily in our online right media sphere. The news that gets to them about radical Democrats is everyone's making a fuss over this guy, and he's great. He's a normal guy that has something in his past. He's going to get rid of it.
It's so true. It's so true, Abe.
And by the way, I think this may even apply when it comes to El-Sayed, because to me, the media treatment, the organized campaign around Zohran Mamdani was so instructive. The way everyone came around to embrace him and tell a story about him to, let's say, independents, that was false about who he is, what he cares about, and what he can do. I think we cannot underestimate the effect of that.
Abe, can I just mention an example to illustrate your point? The Beacon has a story this morning about the leading fundraiser in a in a blue district. The primary is the election in New Jersey, where the leading fundraiser in that race is a candidate, Adam Hamawi, who testified for the defense in the trial of the blind sheikh. He's an associate of the blind sheikh. This has not been covered in any media outlet. Total blackout.
And just for people who need historical refresher, the blind sheikh was the inspiration for and the organizing principle around the first bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993, convicted in a courtroom in
by our friend Andy McCarthy.
Shout out to Andy McCarthy,
who led the prosecution.
And judge, and then future Attorney General Michael Mukasey was presiding over that case.
If this was a Republican, every mainstream outlet would be writing about the type of candidates that are running. There is truly a takeover happening of the Democratic Party. We are watching it right now.
And we are watching the apologists ooze themselves in line. This morning, Frank Bruni in the New York Times, who positions himself as a moderate centrist, explaining that while Graham Plattner's not the kind of person that he would ordinarily want, the need to defeat Trump is so central that he's willing to say that he wants him to be the nominee. So welcome. People are constantly making parallels to 1932 and 1933. Welcome to Weimar, where, look, the Nazi, these National Socialists, they're vulgar and they're crude and they're that. But, we can work with them. We can contain them. We can control them. I don't like these parallels particularly, but I'm not the inventor of these parallels. And the effort to mainstream radical, anti-American, anti-Semitic voice and say that they can be cleansed by the healing power of centrist milquetoast bullshit is exactly what leads extremists to win over liberals. This is liberalism's great weakness, real liberalism. It's like the 60s and the 70s.
Well, we also
you're
have
a
a more
liberal
recent,
professor on campus. They start coming at you, and you know what you do? You're like, let me wave my little flag. Leave me alone. Leave me alone. I'm with you. Hey, let Viet Cong. Really great. Generally speaking, I'm a Democrat. I believe in the democratic institutions, but look, America's done a lot of bad things. Just don't come after me and my family, whatever. I mean, this is that kind of liberal cowardice. Not that there are all kinds of different kinds of right-wing cowardice that we could go into. I'm not doing that right now. But reading Frank Bruni in the New York Times this morning, and the stuff that all these hack John Favreau, the Pod Save America guys, all those guys are like saying it's okay that Graham Plattner has a Totenkopf tattoo on his body, that he is a Hamas, that he praised Hamas's tactics, that he has done all this stuff in the course of his life before becoming a politician. You go ahead. Go ahead. Really, curse your souls evermore. It's fine.
We have a recent example of this also of the, you don't even have to go back to Weimar and use their, example. This is what Corbynization is. This is in the UK, when Corbyn, who is just like an unrepentant Stalinist. I mean, he's just, it's like he's somebody from out of the pay. Doesn't even pretend to not be that type of guy. When he started making his insurgent play for Labour Party voters, the mainstream and the centrists and the establishment said, why don't we bring these guys into the tent? Because it'll shut them up. Oh, we give the Corbynites, this, bring them in. Instead of shouting outside the tent, they'll be inside the tent. They'll be part of the coalition. They'll feel part of the coalition. That's all they really want. And it will moderate everything. And instead, the Corbynites overthrew the establishment in 12 minutes. I mean, it was like an overnight thing. And that's exactly what Democrats are doing now. Well, we should, we have to expand the tent. We can't have these purity tests, although they can have purity tests as long as it's, no Zionists allowed or whatever. But we can't have these, purity tests. We'll bring them in. We'll expand the tent. But what happened in Britain, and there's no reason to think it's not happening before our eyes here, was that the extremists just simply waltzed in and sat in the big chair, and there was no resistance. Eliana brought up Maher Bitar and the role that he's playing in foreign policy development for the Democrats now. That group, that organization, is Jake Sullivan's organization. Jake Sullivan was the model moderate for years in the Washington circles. We all knew Jake as the guy who would hear you out and and had a head on his shoulders and had some common sense and all this other stuff. The Maher Bitar is now taking over the moderate group. Moderate group said to Maher, okay, you run us now. So that's it. There's no Jake Sullivans. They're literally offering the big chairs to these guys. And there's no reason it wouldn't happen in the Senate. There's no reason that AOC's ability to get Nancy Pelosi to agree to step out of leadership before she stepped out of Congress. There's no reason to believe that wasn't the beginning of a boulder rolling downhill.
There is an interesting question, though, that I think looms for the Democrats. in the same way that it will soon for the Republicans. I mean, the Democrats have a very homegrown model for this, and that's the MAGA populist takeover of traditional Republican Party. That happened, a little more gradually. And I think the message there was much more about economic change and sort of, tearing down the useless institutions, all that stuff. And that has been a very successful political movement. It has left traditional conservatives, of which I consider myself one, in retreat. There is no doubt about that. However, it had an extraordinary, charismatic political leader in Donald Trump. When he exits the stage, will that same coalition be able to coalesce around a new candidate? Will it be able to continue in its current form policy-wise? We're already seeing a lot of fracturing on some of the policy issues, which I think is actually healthy in the way our democracy works. The Democrats don't have a chosen leader yet. And I think a lot of what we're seeing is trial runs to see just what the public will tolerate. AOC, obviously very ambitious, but there are lots of ambitious politicians in the Democratic side now, not all of them DSA friendly. So I think they have very little time, just a few years to cultivate that kind of leader. And waiting in the wings, as we all know, is Kamala Harris, thinking she's going to make her extraordinary comeback. So they don't have a Donald Trump on their side to lead this new radicalization movement.
I mean, there may not have to be a Donald Trump.
Well, that's a question. Yeah.
And Seth's description of Corbynization is interesting because that was literally a move by the Labor Party, changed its own internal nominating rules to create a system whereby you could become a delegate, essentially, at the Labor nominating convention by either paying £5 or £10. And then you could go and be part of the nominators. And so this was an effort to sort of create, what would appear to be a populist movement against the Tories. And what happened was the Corbynites bought the nomination, bought the premiership for Corbyn. They bought it by paying £5 to go to the nominating convention in Blackpool or wherever it was, and then take the party over and then win. And then there was Jeremy Corbyn. The Democrats, the story here is, again, this kind of, you have liberals in the Democratic Party getting swamped by radicals. And just as happened with Trump, without a Trump, the conservatives did not resist mostly. The conservatives that did resist, Trump took a cleaver to, right? Bob Corker, Jeff Flake, anyone in the party, Peter Mayer, Adam Kinzinger, anybody in the party who spoke out against him or what he represented, he basically, took a meat cleaver to them, thus as a warning to other people. But in the case of the Democrat Party, all it took was, oh my God, I'm losing to this guy. I'm 79 years old. I'm Janet Mills. I'm the governor of the state. I'm not going to finish my political career getting humiliated. I'm going to step out before anything bad happens. He's suddenly now the Democratic nominee, and it takes 2 hours for Chuck Schumer, everybody in the Democratic Party to fall in line behind this guy. So it's not like there are strata, as the Maher Bitar story indicates.
No, the question for
liberalism has given up in the Democratic Party. It has ceded the notion that it has no future in the Democratic Party, that all the energy is with the radicals.
The questions were posed to Plattner, like, are you going to take Schumer's money? Will you take the establishment's money? Will you sully yourself by associating with them? It wasn't the opposite direction.
Yeah,
by the way, that's a very important part of this story, Eliana, is the disaster for Schumer. He's their floor leader. He's the guy who will be majority leader if the Graham Plattners of the party succeed in the general, right? This is the disaster for Schumer's establishment.
Maybe not.
I was going to say he will face a leadership challenge.
These are people who have pledged not to support him.
Yeah. I mean, he still needs somebody.
Right. I mean,
that's 50.
Right.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, but this is the point. This is an election that the Democrats are going almost certainly to win. And Schumer
but not in the Senate.
maybe as not in the Senate, but they're going overall. This is going to be seen as that election night is on track to be a better night for Democrats than Republicans.
Yeah.
Schumer's not going to lose his spot with a wipeout. He's going to lose, if he loses his spot, it's because they're just sick and tired of him and they don't need him. They don't need him. They have the numbers. This is like, when you have the numbers for a leadership challenge or something. They're going to have the numbers if they want, as Eliana says. And that is, watching this happen as we get closer to November is going to be very interesting to see what Schumer tries to do to stem that tide, to save his own rear end.
Yeah, he's not going to do anything. His game is going to be to throw in all of his cards with he's going to do whatever he can to get whoever he can elected. And, it could be that a guy is both a member of the Klan and a Nazi and fought for the North Vietnamese and was a terrorist and blew up a mall, and he'll still support them as long as they're the nominee.
But he now farms oysters, John, so it's fine.
He farms oysters, exactly. So
the progressive, you're describing the progressive Voltron.
So I literally caused this conversation to go off the track into this Democratic, our version of soul searching for the Democratic Party, because I said Trump was going to start feeling pressure that he really didn't feel 3 weeks ago from Republicans on the Hill who might be entertaining the possibility that they can draw to an inside straight and save themselves from that wipeout. And the card they're going to play with Trump is get the war over with. Look, it's like 2/3 unpopular. You're dragging us down. If you could just get out of it so that we can run against how crazy the Democrats are, they won't be able to run against us on how crazy you are in Iran. They will, of course, run on how crazy he is, period. But I don't think that'll work. And I do think that Trump is as committed as he has been to any issue in his entire life, aside from immigration, to the idea that he is not leaving office, if he can help it, with the Iranians not being denuclearized. That he has made that the precondition of this term. Anything less, he fails. On his own terms, he fails. So my question to you guys is, how far, if, again, make a bad pop culture reference, Sean Connery in The Untouchables and David Mamet's line, like, what are you prepared to do, right? What is he prepared to do to win this war? Because he's already getting the Iranians have humiliated you, says the German chancellor, and you suck, and the entire foreign policy, this is, Tucker Carlson, not that I want to quote Tucker, says this is the biggest mistake the worst thing any president has ever done. Not the Trail of Tears, not the Japanese internment,
I'm happy that Tucker went on that rant because I think in some small way that will contribute to Trump's obstinacy here.
I agree with you. We could talk about it at some point if we really want to, but I'm just saying he has to decide how resolute he is going to be and what that means. And that means like hearing from Admiral Cooper and from General Keane on what possible plans there are to bring the Iranians to their knees.
The bigger pressure, I think, will come on him. Will come at him if he decides to wait out, to play a waiting game regarding the blockade. That's when every voice is going to come at him, including all sorts of industrial and commercial interests, and say we can't do this. But the really frustrating thing about that is that if the U.S. plays the waiting game, there is certain victory for us at the end of that line and certain defeat for Iran at the end of that. They can't. As Seth said earlier, they literally can't wait this one out. They can't play this till the end. We can. And again, it's not something he's going to, announce and telegraph that we are doing this until they're broken. But that is the truth.
Well, look,
He's
Fred
also
Kagan.
in 10 days, he's meeting, his rescheduled meeting with Xi happens. And so I do wonder in the next 10 days whether there's some thought being, I assume there is some thought being put into China's role here. They've been kind of, they've stayed back. They've been doing a little helping the Iranians here and there. And, that is, I assume, one of the overarching issues with the sense of urgency in the administration to kind of figure out a strategy. But John, to answer your question, he just has to decide what victory looks like, declare it, pursue it, achieve it, and then declare the war over. And that's actually been where he's been all over the place, right? Is it the nuclear material? Is it the blockade? Is it the Strait of Hormuz? We're ping-ponging around these couple of things. I think, to Seth's point at the very beginning of the show, a consistent message about what victory is would be helpful. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it does have to say, these are our goals, and we're at this stage of achieving them. That would also send a very strong message to the Chinese about how we prosecute these sorts of conflicts.
I am pretty sure that I know what the end goal of the war is, as stated from the beginning to now. And it's not a lot of things we thought it might be, it isn't, right? It's not regime change. Regime change might be the glorious after effect of a successful resolution to the war as we see it. It is getting hold of the nuclear material. He has all but said that is the one through line from the first moment he started talking about this through the moment after the assassination attempt at the White House Correspondents' Dinner to now. If he says what he's doing, he says Iran can never get a nuclear weapon. Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. It can never, it can never, it can never. If he declares that he has achieved that aim, which he maybe prematurely did after Desert Hammer, right, last year, but from his perspective, he wants that nuclear material. That deal, of course, is a complicated deal because it means the Iranians will have to agree to let us go in and dig a tunnel, go into the sites and get the material. We'll have to do it. It's to be done very carefully under supervision. It means Iran accedes to an American presence on Iranian soil to do this thing, get it out, and leave, and that is how we will win the war. How we get there could be we wait it out, as because they can't abide it, or we start inflicting the kind of pain that will actually hurt them more. We thought we were doing it by decapitating them. Turns out that didn't do it. So decapitation, we can continue to decapitate, but and they might get weaker and weaker. Their abilities may degrade over time since they lose all of their institutional knowledge and the people who are the best leaders and all of that. But again, that's also a waiting game, decapitation, as it turns out. So it's not decapitation. It's not destroying things. They don't care about the condition of their people. They don't care about the penury, starvation, and misery of their people. Maybe that's even helpful to them. But so that's where we are. And so he has to figure out what it means to be able to get to that point. Because right now, honestly, anything less than being able to say that he went in, he made sure that one of the world's most dangerous and worst countries will never get a nuclear weapon. And here's why, because we took all the stuff away from them, is the best answer, is obviously the clearest version of it, right? We've confiscated their contraband. We've taken it, they'll never have it again. We're destroying it. But I think anything less than that, and he loses in his own scenario. But how we get from there to here, there could be 15 different ways. I do think, and I think we should talk, the Iranians claimed this morning that it fired on an American ship. We deny it. I'm pretty sure so the Iranians are also going to play this shadow puppet game where they're going to claim that they're winning the war, that they're hitting us and killing us and doing terrible things to us. And these stories about how all our bases have been like grievously damaged in the Middle East, but we're lying about it and all that stuff. So that's all part of a propaganda campaign. Not that some damage hasn't been done to U.S. bases. That's true. But it's not, obviously catastrophic, and almost nobody died or was injured in any of those attacks. But they're going to
There were a
claim
lot
things.
more injuries than were initially reported by this administration at the very start of the conflict. When the first soldiers died, there were in those drone strikes did injure a lot of soldiers, and that was not really emphasized by the administration.
Right. Okay, but when we think about what the Iranians are having surprising success in their propaganda war. I mean, I say surprising because, like, I didn't know anybody liked Iran. I don't think anybody really likes Iran. It's just that the hatred of Trump is so deep and all-consuming that people are willing to believe anything as long as it redounds negatively
It's not
to
just
Trump's
that.
efforts here.
It's not just that. It's not just that. It's that the mission and purpose of Iran's proxies has been so thoroughly laundered that it's safer to get on board. To if it was safe, excuse me, if it was made safe to walk around with Hamas and Hezbollah flags, you could now walk around with an Iranian Republic flag too.
Right. Also over the weekend, big story at the University of Michigan. Professor gives a commencement address and goes off script to praise the protesters on campus for being so resolute and serious and showing what it can mean to really be a person of integrity and quality, causing a very big issue inside the University of Michigan system. The president now distancing himself from Professor Peterson, who made this speech saying that he did what he did in an unauthorized fashion. You have two regents, you have two people. It's going to become a political issue in the Michigan Senate and governor's race that this happened. And I just think we're stuff is starting to happen again, even though college is basically over for the summer. But the activation, there's been an activation of the encampment people again. There was a sort of a scene on the steps of Low Library at Columbia University. If you looked at the crowd, everybody in it was about 92 years old. So I don't think they were students. They all looked like retired New York City school teachers to me in keffiyehs. But stuff is happening again.
Well, a couple of other things, John, to add to that. The University of Michigan elects regents, i.e. board members, in an interesting way where they're elected statewide and they run as members of political parties. And there is a contested election for a regent. And at the convention, a Democratic regent, Jordan Acker, who is currently a regent, was knocked off in a primary by another one of these Islamist candidates, Amir Mokhled. So he is now the Democratic nominee for a seat on the University of Michigan Board of Regents, the governing board. He has praised Hezbollah and represented in litigation both the protesters who were activated and who were praised in this commencement address, as well as a man who tried and failed to shoot up a police station, and he filed a wrongful death suit on behalf of that man who was shot dead as he was attempting to shoot police. So that will be quite an interesting race and have an impact on the governance of the University of Michigan. And then at Cornell University, where Norman Finkelstein was speaking, not exactly an enemy of the protesting class, these pro-Palestinian protesters followed the president of Cornell out to his vehicle and surrounded the vehicle. And as he backed up, he brushed one of these kids, and they have now succeeded in turning this into a national story about the terrible assault, on their free speech rights, as they were surrounding his car and chasing him and screaming at him as he attempted to exit the Norman Finkelstein event.
Norman Finkelstein, just for people to know, is a radical anti-Zionist academic whose entire, I mean,
He must
pseudo-academic.
be 125 years old at
But I
least.
mean, he literally, his entire career, he's like the original Jewish anti-Zionist conspiracist. Having Norman Finkelstein speak is the sort of thing you would expect an Islamist group to do. The fact that the president of Cornell even attended the speech by Norman Finkelstein should be grounds for dismissal. It's like, attending as far as I'm concerned. But, I'm not, it's a private institution. Sei gesund to everybody who's paying
But
tuition
he should
at
have
Cornell.
run over the protesters faster.
You
Should have
know,
backed up harder.
I don't know.
Could've
We
been
keep
more
hearing,
aggressive.
we keep hearing that, that's not really, so people have, all sorts of grounds to do things when they're really, really upset. I don't know if you know that. Like, when you're upset, you sort of get a pass. And, also he was
going through a difficult time.
So I'm just saying we may be in for there's a wave. This is going to sound like a crazy thing to say because it's like never stop, but there's going to be a wave of anti-Semitism is about to hit this summer. It's weird because as I say, didn't know that there wasn't a wave, but it's like there's going to be an even bigger wave, or there's going to be a rolling, cascading series of waves. We're getting all this noise about this. It's not just, or it's signal, it's noise that's, I think, a signal that it's all about to start anew. It's going to be a long, hot summer, and it's going to be centering on these cases like Abdul al-Sayed's candidacy or Alawi's candidacy in New Jersey. Or
I was going to add that all of these people running for office, both at the state level and the congressional level, will be out hitting the roads, having town halls, having meetings. And we have seen this is a really, really bad side effect of our hyper-polarized society. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, it's often unsafe for people to campaign in person in some areas. I mean, there have been a lot of threats against people running for office, and people have to cancel events. And this is a truly nonpartisan problem. It really is the threats against people who are elected to office, who are trying to do their responsible thing as a candidate and stand before the people and have an argument, have a discussion, share their views. That is a baseline small d democratic process that we are seeing erode because of extremist threats, because of people surrounding vehicles or claiming, calling in bomb threats. And I think this summer will unfortunately see an uptick in that. And that's really bad for how our politics works. We've already got a pretty dysfunctional process going on, and that's not going to help.
Seth, you had a post last week about a report on global anti-Semitism. Who was the report from again?
That was Tel Aviv University.
Tel Aviv University. And you pointed out that unlike previous waves of anti-Semitic violence and incidents, this one hasn't really abated at all, if you look at it in its totality.
Yeah, the Tel Aviv University, they do an annual report on global anti-Semitism, and so they rely on monitors in each country. And so we don't have according to Russia, there were no anti-Semitic assaults or whatever, last year. So but it's really useful for the West, which has fairly reliable reporting procedures, a free media, free society, So the Western states were the ones that really jumped out because they're the ones that look the worst. What usually happens is that these waves will crest and fall away. And eventually, I suppose that will happen, but it's not happening now, as you say. In fact, in several Western countries, it was much more common for the numbers of anti-Semitic assaults to go up. This happened in countries where overall anti-Semitic incidents went up, but it also happened in some countries where overall anti-Semitic incidents went down. The violent anti-Semitic incidents still went up. And what that tells you is that it's morphing, but a less violent anti-Semitic wave became a more violent anti-Semitic wave. People stopped, tagging, Jewish shops with a red triangle and started, throwing a homemade firebomb at a cafe or a synagogue or a Hatzalah truck or something like that. And so, yes, even in places where the overall numbers, where they're trying to brag and say, well, at least it dropped, it's going in the right direction. Even in the states where the numbers would suggest it might be going in the right direction, it is not going in the right direction, because even in those places, it got more violent. And this was, and you ask people, like, what are you? Well, there's less graffiti, but more people are being stabbed in Golders Green. Which are they going to be more concerned about? Which is going to shape their society more? Which is going to, have more of an effect on their decisions, on the security decisions, where they live, all that stuff. And so, yeah, things are rolling along still in a way that you don't get the sense of from the global media, because in some places the numbers of total incidents are going down slightly, and in sometimes there's just an exhaustion and the media is tired of talking about it and doesn't want to and whatever. But yes, there is this sense that things have at least, evened out. They haven't yet since October 7th, 2023.
And there's been a really disturbing tendency on the part of certain media figures, certain public officials, to not so subtly blame the victims by saying, well, if you didn't support the state of Israel, then this probably wouldn't happen. If you didn't wear a kippah in public, maybe you wouldn't put a target on your back. I've seen an uptick just anecdotally. I mean, Mehdi Hassan being the worst and most terrible case, but he's always been terrible. But we do see this sense of freedom for people to blame the victims of anti-Semitic violence in this way. And then that, of course, has the effect. And you've seen a lot of this discussion among Jews in Britain right now. What do we do? How do we go about our daily life? Anecdotes about people telling their children, like, don't tell, if someone asks you, don't admit you're a Jew. That is the kind of very corrosive, pernicious cultural pressure that's being brought to bear on people that is quite different from even just 5-10 years ago.
The perfect statement, we can close on this just to be crushingly morose. The perfect statement of this came from Sir Tony Brenton, who was Britain's ambassador to Russia, published in a British newspaper on May 2nd. Sir, your excellent statistical article, What the Figures Say About Rising Anti-Semitism, makes one point clear. The great leap in anti-Semitism, quote unquote, took place in late 2023 and thus was not, or mostly not, anti-Semitism at all, but widespread popular rage at the Israeli overreaction to the Hamas atrocities of October that year. This, of course, does not excuse the anti-Jewish outrages that have taken place since, but does suggest that the UK Jewish community could help to damp down the likelihood of such outrages by making it clear that it is as appalled by the brutality of Israeli policy as almost everyone else is. Signed, Sir Tony Brenton, former British ambassador to Russia. So this is the sort of rhetoric we thought would have been retired forever by the Holocaust. And here it is back, right there. Look, you're not going to say that Jews are terrible if you're a Jew, if you're not going to acknowledge that you should be as outraged at the monstrosity of other Jews as everybody else is. You deserve what you get, you kike bastards. Sincerely, Sir Tony Brenton, British ambassador, Sir Tony Brenton. Once again, maybe King Charles should think about revoking his knighthood, but I doubt that will happen. We'll be back tomorrow for Christine, Eliana, Seth, and Abe. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.